An aftershock. We'll keep watching it for you. Other story we're watching this morning, of course, is the latest in what is happening in George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin case. Big question today is, where is he? George Zimmerman. Everybody wants to know. His attorneys had this bombshell announcement that they're dropping the case. I spoke to them a few minutes ago. They said, against their advice, Zimmerman had reached out to talk to the special prosecutor, Angela Corey. They said that they were not revealing a confidence in telling us that, because that's the advice they would obviously give to any client, that everything has to go through them. They were in the middle of negotiating these conversations with the special prosecutor when the special prosecutor called them and said, you know, your client called us. They hadn't been able to reach him, and also apparently he was reaching out to some news organizations as well.
Yeah, while they might not have broken a privilege or a confidence in relaying that information to you or Ashley or Zoraida, who they spoke to this morning, they might have when they talked about his mental state. They're speculating on George Zimmerman's mental state, and everything we're hearing this morning, I think we're going to have a conversation later this morning with Jose Baez. This is really walking the line on attorney-client privilege, speculating about the mental state of a client that you haven't spoke to, admittedly, in 3 days?
In days, yeah. And you've never met in person.
Calling these guys his lawyers, I think, is questionable at this point. I mean,
I'd say ex.
Yeah,
even
very much.
they
left
really
the window open. They left the window open. They said if he wanted to come back to them, they would represent him yet again.
Absolutely. Here's a little bit of the interview I did, and then we'll talk on the other side. Take a look.
Ethically, the prosecutor said, we can't talk to you. We know you have representation, so we can't talk to you, which is the right thing to do. They tipped us off, so it was all done above board. And, just so that we remain above board, we couldn't go on doing interviews and talking about the case as though we represented George Zimmerman, when sometime on Sunday, something changed. As of Saturday, everything, the relationship I had with George Zimmerman, that we had with George Zimmerman, was good. We were proceeding, we were going on the shows and speaking out on his behalf, and we're going to continue to represent him, whichever direction the case went in the legal forum. And that stopped, and he failed to return phone calls, failed to return texts.
Any clue?
I get a text saying, well, I'll call you after 9.
So any clue as to what happened from Saturday to Sunday? Or, was there anything that happened on Saturday that would tip you off to something that ended up happening on Sunday?
No, nothing that I can tell. Only, there was a website set up where he started collecting money, and, he started contacting people outside. He was trying to call the prosecutor. All these things, I mean, him setting up his own website was fine, because that makes sure that I don't have any touch. I never touch his money, and that's good for me. The contacts with other people probably would have been better if he waited a little while before he was making contacts. But when he, and when he wanted to make his statement to the prosecutor's office, I didn't have a problem with him doing that either. There was just a process to go through. Why, and what happened over that period of time? I've been in contact with family and so on. I don't have any answers as to what's going on.
Let us make it also clear that the website that we set up in conjunction with his father, so that any money collected through that website would go directly to an account that we didn't have the ability to touch or do anything with. That was a family funding website as well.
So how often were you talking to him before you lost contact, obviously, between Saturday and Sunday? Were you talking to him a couple of times a day, 5 times a day?
It would depend on the day. Sometimes it would be a couple times. Sometimes it would be more than that. Sometimes it would be just 1 time a day. But just to keep contact of what we're doing with the case, what we're doing as far as going on the different programs, doing the interviews, and trying to raise the public perception, to try to encourage the public to look at the evidence instead of jumping on the bandwagon to just, sentence George Zimmerman to prison or whatever else they wanted to do. To hear the facts and show that, he was acting in self-defense.
Have you heard from George Zimmerman ever since you've held that press conference?
No.
That's interesting. So you talked about...
That's no times 2.
I gathered. You've talked about at that press conference that you believed that he seemed distraught to you. Are you worried about his emotional state and his physical safety right now?
Yes, I'm still concerned about George and his mental state and his physical safety. He is a good man. A very tragic situation happened. It's been very distressful to him. I believe in his innocence. I believe that he was in this whole thing, that he was the victim, and of this, when he was attacked and he defended himself, and now he's become the victim of basically the media who's put an improper spin on this case. And my concern is for him. And if he would want us to come back and represent him, we'd be glad to represent him. But at this point, he's making that impossible for us to ethically come out and say, oh, well, we represent George Zimmerman. And then the next question, when's the last time you talked to him? It's, well, we haven't talked to him and had communication in nearly 3 days now. And we're left with nothing ethically we could do except remove ourselves from the case.
So when you say you're worried about him, are you worried that someone could injure him? Are you worried that he could harm himself?
I'm worried that someone's going to injure him. I don't have any indication that he's going to harm himself.
You said that you knew.
There have been, there have been a lot of people, a lot of folks out in the blogosphere and so forth, who've made statements way beyond irresponsible, physically threatening, saying if no one else does, we're going to get justice for Trayvon. Those sorts of statements are troubling, and we don't know, of course, from any one of them whether they're just a lot of talk or whether there's someone who actually has that kind of intent. But if I were George Zimmerman, I'd be very concerned about it.
Do you know who he's been getting advice from? Obviously, we've had an opportunity to talk to some of his neighbors and his friends who clearly were in some kind of contact with him, and then they would come on the air and talk to us. Who is he talking to, if he's not talking to you?
I don't know. I would just be speculating if I did, because he's cut off contact with us. And, if he wanted to, I would have appreciated if he would have said, well, I think I'm going to listen to this person and not you, and I don't want you to represent me anymore. That would have made things a lot easier. Instead, it was just, oh, I'll call you at 9 o'clock, and then 9 o'clock comes and goes, and there's no phone call, no text, no email. And because we have never met face-to-face, it was all communication through the telephone and text messages and email, and that's just been stopped at this point.
And have you talked to his father, and I know his brother as well have been vocal in the media and sort of asked them, hey, what's going on? Where is he?
Yes, I spoke. Well, I've never spoken with the brother, but I've had regular contact with his father, and they didn't have any information to share with me on that, of why he's not calling me back either.
You said something interesting yesterday, Mr. Uhrig. You said, for those of you who think you're going to find him, he's far away from Florida, and of course that meant for many people trying to decide, was he on the run? Was he hiding for his safety in the United States? Had he left the United States? Can you elaborate on that for me?
Sure. A lot of people are quick to jump to conclusions, and usually the conclusions that they had before they heard the facts. All I was trying to represent is for those people who might be thinking about staking out family members' homes or friends' homes and either endangering them or causing them any distress, there's no point in doing that. He hasn't left the country. He's not going to flee. He wouldn't have called the prosecutor's office and asked to come in and tell his side of the story if he was fleeing. Clearly, he has represented to us routinely that if he is charged, he will turn himself in. We have no reason to believe he's changed his mind about that. But the fact that he's hiding for his own safety shouldn't be interpreted to be that he's hiding from the authorities or planning to flee.
You have said that you have seen evidence that could change the course of public opinion, and I know you don't want to get into the specifics, but can you categorize it for me? What can you say about that evidence? Is it physical evidence from that night that the police are holding on to? Is it someone's version of the stories? Is it an eyewitness that might come forward and say something? What are you talking about?
There's a lot of evidence that hasn't been released yet, and I think once everyone sees that, if they'll even look at it, because quite frankly, there's evidence out there and no one's painting it, is looking at all the evidence. They're taking bits and pieces and drawing the conclusion that there was a murder, and there wasn't. It was George Zimmerman acting in self-defense. But when all the evidence is brought out by the police and everyone sees the whole picture, they'll see that George Zimmerman acted in self-defense. And there are things that we know that we've agreed not to disclose, and I'm not going to disclose that now either.
Attorneys Hal Uhrig and Craig Sonner, they used to represent George Zimmerman, telling us today they no longer represent him. They haven't talked to him since Saturday, haven't had a conversation that was scheduled for Sunday, and they are dropping him as a client. But